The Pieces Lie Where They Fell by Evil Humor. Edited and co-authored by Anon E. Mouse Jr. Read for you by My Name is R. Chapter 35. Page Turner, Rex, and Xvital. Part 1. Page Turner. Paige had to do her best not to panic, as they were suddenly ushered into a space underneath the cabin they had been living in for the past week. But she was very scared being here in the Crystal Dominance. "Hey, you doing okay, Paigey?" Vixley asked, as she sat down in a strange-looking chair that actually seemed to work for her backward-jointed legs. "Can't imagine that she's overjoyed being here," Xvital said, with a bucket in her lap. She was curled up against a corner of the hidden hold that Vixley had so casually revealed by reaching under the shill of one of the bunks to hit a switch. Not even the Order had known of this place, and after having Vixley write down a list of other possible hidden caches, they had shoved them down into this dark place and closed the lid on them. The capital of the anti-changeling feelings in the world? It would be like Vixley going to Rome or something. "Hey, don't joke about that," Vixley hissed. "We left the Romaine Empire. We did not give it up to those ponies." "I sense that this is a sensitive issue for you. One of these days, we Minotaurs will retake Rome and restore the proper Romaine Empire and all the old borders," she snorted, tilting her head to the side. "I am fairly certain that those in France, Bitely, Catabalon, the Griffish Isles, Germain, Anazigan, and a hoofful of other nations would have some words about that," Knight said, rolling his golden eye in the dark. "How do you know about the old kingdoms?" "I mean, France, Bitely, Catabalon, the Griffish Isles, and Germain are the known ones, but Anazigan?" Vixley leaned towards him, with Knight shifting uncomfortably. "It was part of my history lessons, and I used to attend to some board games that dealt with the past." Knight chuckled a bit nervously, tapping his hooves together. "Used to be Byzantine and just flatten the others by relying on how good they were from the get-go, and reforge the Romaine Empire without any real struggle. And they got annoyed at me and told me to buzz off for a while. And I never went back." He let out a tiny sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "So you're a history nerd that used to scum a board game," Wind chuckled as he patted Knight on the back with his wing. "Big deal. Or are you worried that your tough guy image is going to be ruined when it comes out that you hung out with nerds?" "Oh, please. As if those in my old team for the sword tournament would need anything else to mock me with. My temper, my high standards, my glares. This is mild compared to all that they know. Oh, this is mild compared to all that. And they know I've got enough dirt on them if they try anything. Besides, with your little Butcher of the Everfree Forest name going on, I doubt they'd be stupid enough to mock you on liking those nerd games," Wind snarked. Knight responded by rolling his eye and jabbing Wind in the gut playfully. "As amusing and comforting as it is to see you two finally getting along," Rex said with a chuckle before looking at her, "I do believe we are getting off topic here and neglecting Paige's well-being." "Oh no, please, keep on talking about other stuff. I am perfectly fine blending in the background," Paige said with a weak chuckle. "I am being honest here. As a changeling," how odd it was to admit that out loud in public, "we rarely do well being dragged into the spotlight. Part of our nature is to be on the edge of things, to blend in and avoid being seen. And we are going to be landing in the capital, where they make it their business to find and kill changelings, ever since the world drove Sombra back here and killed him." "Say, guys," Vixley said as she leaned across her chair, "do you think our foe could be him? I mean, he came back once already after the gods and goddesses banished him and the crystal dominants away. What's to say he didn't sneak away a slice of himself and wait until he was strong enough to come back? Considering it took the entire world working in unison to drive his empire back to this city-state, it's a fairly horrific prospect that we could be responsible to do what took almost a decade to accomplish in the past, Rex said as he reached into Wynn's pack and took out a bottle and began to drink straight from the stout. While I am an atheist, we would need divine help to deal with him. Knight? Windbreaker began, with Knight shaking his head. We didn't run many matches with the Crystal World War table set. It was near impossible for any of us to defeat the guy playing as him, and it wasn't that much fun, Knight said with a shudder. Well, with that terrifying thought in mind, Vittle groaned as she emptied her stomach again. We don't know anything, and I don't think we should scare ourselves silly with that kind of speculation. She sighed. Whatever we're up against, we'll beat it. And we'll be sure to take care of each other, Paige said, doing her best to calm her racing heart. Hey guys, I think we're landing, Vixley said, tilting her head. I can hear the engines slowing down. Oh, thank the gods, this... Vittle trailed off, shooting worried looks at the Minotaur, who was thumbing her hammer, before coughing into her tail hand. This fine airship, one of the best I have ever ridden. You saying I'm a bad pilot, Vittle? Vixley asked softly, as she had one of her hammers on her lap, with Vittle mewling in fright. She began to gulp and look around for support, but thankfully Vixley couldn't keep her straight face any more, and was about to laugh when there was a loud thud above their heads. She instantly ceased her actions and waited as metal on wood echoed out above their head. No doubt the crystal guards examining the ship. Paige, along with the rest of them, waited in complete silence as the guards shuffled around the room before pausing. No disrespect, revered ones, the guard above her head said, sending a wave of dust at them. Before Paige could even wrinkle her nose, Vittle had reached out with her tail hand and clamped down, even going so far as to plug her nostrils with her fingers. But why do you have an examination mirror in this room? There was a long pause before the guard spoke again. I see. And if you have any information on the Traitorous Six, please do not hesitate to contact us. One of the other guards spoke softly. Or not. There was a sudden loud smack and a clatter of metal on the ground, with the whimpering of the second guard. Revered ones, our ardent daffodil spoke out of place, the first guard said in a submissive tone. She did not mean to imply anything against the equestrian governor. There was another loud smack and the sound of a guard hitting the floor. There was another long stretch of silence, pockmarked by what seemed like the order forcing the guard back down. I understand, revered ones, the first guard said with a slight slur to his voice. My thanks to you for correcting my errors. I serve all of Equestria, not just the Crystal Dominants, for they are one. Paige did her best not to jump when a drop of blood fell onto her head, telling her the reason for the slur. Her ears flicked as the guard dragged himself to his hooves before the other guard was dragged up. We are done here, revered ones. We are thankful for your time and your lessons. The last words sounded like it was dragged out by force. The guards then began to walk out of the room, with the order ponies staying put, tapping the top of the hold twice before leaving. After a period of time passed, Vittle moved her tail hand off and out of her nose, muttering a soft apology. Windbreaker looked around the room before he asked, You think we're safe? I guess so, Vixley said as she peered upwards. Rex, you hear anything up there? There are no ponies around that I can hear, the Diamond Dog replied. However, I would wait until one of the Order members comes back. He froze and sniffed. And I think I hear one now. You sure it's an Order member? Windbreaker asked. Almost positive, Rex replied. I'd recognize the sound of this one's footstep. The others turned to give him startled looks, but before any pony could say anything, the hatch opened, revealed a cloaked figure in the Order's distinctive cloak and mask, making a gesture with one hoof that any pony could recognize as, "Come here." Carefully they climbed their way out of the hold, Vix Lee bringing up the rear just in case, and were soon standing in their room. So, what now? The Minotaur asked. The Order member gave a series of gestures, and Fiddle nodded. We're clear, she reported. The Crystal Guards have left the ship, and this landing pad. We still have to get dressed before we can leave, though. She accepted the cloak and mask that the Order member was holding, with the others taking their own cloaks and masks. In minutes they were ready to go, with Vittle taking the lead again, with Windbreaker right behind her. Knight followed the Griffin, with Paige walking behind him, as he was a bit shaky due to seeing out of only one eye. Rex was behind her, and of course Vix Lee took up the rear. The Order was forcing them to move quickly, as they certainly did not look like Order members. Walking up the hallways of the ship before reaching the deck to see that they were now on the upper levels of what was once the Palace of the Crystal Empire, now refitted to serve the Order. Of course, the Order hadn't dared change a single thing about it due to the sheer historical value, as well as the fact that there were fragments of a legend noted from the goddess Celestia herself, telling of lost treasure, a gem crafted in the form of a heart, within the grounds that would restore the Empire to its former glory. Not with the native crystal ponies throwing a huge fit about it, and not even the Order tried to fight against. And from what the legends her tribe had managed to pass on to her, if the crystal heart was ever found, then Equestria would find itself at war with a nation that would not be subjugated again by an outside force, with the Crystal Pony tribe only accepting a god or goddess of love on their throne. But there was no way she was telling them that. Too many questions would be raised, and she would be risking the lives of the brave few changelings that lived up here searching for the Crystal Heart, if she so much as hinted that she knew about the gem. Still, they followed them into the former palace, down the staircases, with the feeling of hatred directed straight at her, causing the half-breed to flinch and draw on the love that Knight had in his heart to keep herself from transforming back to her true self. To her relief, Knight didn't even flinch, although she was given a look by one of the Order ponies that caused her to trot a bit faster. They were going lower now, and Paige felt some sort of shift, and by referencing where her changelings were, she realized that they were going underground, and deeper by the minute. Paige did her best to soothe the changelings she brushed across with her mind, but did not dare send a message off in case the Order had the means to detect the hive mind. They were delighted to be in touch with her, that much was obvious, but they were also full of anxiety for her safety. The goddesses and the Eternal Swarm forbid that they learned that she was in the headquarters of the Questioning Order, or they might do something completely foolish, like trying to attack the Order to rescue her. Finally, almost after an hour of walking, did their guide finally stop before a single ordinary-looking door, with a single Order standing guard in front of it. Their guide made a series of signs at the guard before they nodded and stepped to the side, with the guide making a short number of hoof signs and giving her a sheet of papers before waving them in. Vittle seemed to perk up, a flash of excitement in the Oizodolus making Paige wince a bit, before she scampered in with Windbreaker and the rest of them following her inside of this massive storage room, the order ponies slamming the door shut behind them. In an instant, all of them removed their itchy cloaks and the confining masks and tossed them onto the floor, with Paige folding them up in her magic and placing them to the side. "So, Vidal, what's got you so Wind began, only for Vidal to let out a squee and spin on her feet. "Do you know where we are?" Vidal let out another giggle before rubbing her hands together. "We're in their treasure room. All the stuff they've gathered or found is right here. Oh, the stuff I could sell would set me up for life." She let out what seemed to be a cackle before Rex coughed and said, "Are we not here for your element?" "Ah, yes," Vidal said, blinking as she began to calm down. "About that. When they told us about having my element, they revealed that they had 3 items from the old castle, before changing it to 2, Vidal said as she examined the vast rows of crates. "How are we going to find it in all this?" "Well, Vidal," Paige said as she examined the papers and saw it was an inventory list, "we can use this magical thing called a log to see where your element is being stored." "I highly doubt they would actually list the element of whatever the Magi of Stars had, Page Turner," Rex said as he took a step towards the crates. "Well, yes," Paige said with a bit of a titter, frowning as she flipped the pages, "but that just means we can examine each crate to see what should not be there, and that could take hours. I say we just look around and see what we can find," Rex said. "Wind said," shrugging his shoulders. "That sounds good to me, Windbreaker," Rex said, nodding his head. "Ditto," Vixley said as she tilted her head and looked around the room. "Well, guys, I say Paige here has the right idea," Vidal said, pulling her into a sideways hug. "What about you, Knight?" "I'm for looking around," Knight said, causing Paige to do a double take, and Knight noticed her surprise. "What?" "First off, this place is simply massive, and it would take a long time to search it all. I highly doubt they'll let us out until we find it. And the way that these elements work, it will show up when it wants to show up. And secondly, I want depth perception back, and this eye patch off." Knight grumbled as he reached for the fabric covering his eyes and tugged it off his face, blinking his scarred eyelid before he managed to keep it open. "Oh my." Paige placed her hoof on her mouth as she saw at last how his eye looked. The Order's treatment had repaired the worst of the damage. While the pupil had faded somewhat, she could still see the narrowest trace of a line across the eye itself, matching the line she had seen across his eyelid when he first uncovered it. "Knight, can you see?" she asked, faintly. "Of course I can see, Paige," he said, blinking in confusion with everyone wincing except Fix Lee, who seemed impressed by it of all things. "Why? Is it that bad?" Wind trailed off before coughing and turning his head to Rex. "Rex, do you happen to have a mirror on you?" Rex fumbled as he both spoke and searched in his vest for one. "Yes, mirror. I have a mirror. Here." Knight blinked and took it with his right wing and held it to his face, and then froze. He blinked his eyelid a couple of times before holding it open, examining his eye. After a moment of licking his lips, Knight said, "This will take some time getting used to." He then turned to Rex to return the mirror and thanked him. "So, shall we get going?" "Yeah," Fixley said as she began to walk off, then stopped and glanced over her shoulder at him. "Oh, can I have that patch back, since you're done with it? Never know when I'll need it again." Nightblade nodded, hoofing the patch over to her, and watched as she tucked it into her pack. Paige glanced at him as he walked in her direction. "Have it back?" she asked him. Apparently, pony-sized eye patches are among her emergency supplies, Nightblade replied. I didn't ask why. Trust me on this one. Paige shook her head, a faint smile on her face. I wonder what else she carries, she commented. If it's anything like that lizard, I'm not sure I want to know, Knight told her, prompting a nicker of amusement. After a moment, she shook her head and levitated the inventory list back into view, flicking her eyes at the sign indicating which cache this was. Let's see where we are. Paige? Xvital said, causing Paige to frown, losing her place. Not now, Paige shushed her, as she looked over the papers again to get her place. This is kinda important, Xvital said, causing Paige to lose her place again. What is it, Xvital? Paige snapped, as she turned her head to look at Xvital and... They already left, didn't they? Yeah, Xvital admitted. They did. The unicorn changeling mare pouted. Well, that's just great. I thought at least Knight would stay here. Why? Because you two dated? Xvital gave her an odd look. You're the one who said you wanted space. You can't blame him for doing what you asked him to. And besides, he said he wanted to go look around instead of list review thing. Paige just snorted and rolled up the paper to bop Xvital's nose. Don't bring logic into this, missy. He could have listened to me. Xvital just laughed at her, with Paige's face burning up in embarrassment, as she stalked over to the first cache and began to examine what was there and what wasn't. Part 2. Rex. It had been quite some time since they entered this treasure room of relics from the past that the Order had collected, and he had been taking notes after notes of what he saw. This was the first time that anyone had seen these artifacts. The crystals on the moon. He was the first diamond dog in the crystal dominance in almost a millennium. Not since the world banded together to depose the tyrant Sombra. He was glad to be alone right now, due to what his instincts were telling him about the room made of crystals. Licking his lips as his stomach growled, he did his best to suppress his growing hunger, despite how much his mouth was salivating, and his teeth begged him to start eating this delicious-looking, forgotten place. Oh, delicious, forgotten-looking place. Shaking his head, he ran his fingers along the wall, and let out a bit of a low bark of surprise, as his hand clipped a loose stone and knocked it out. Turning his head, he saw something reflective inside. Tilting, he pulled out what appeared to be a clear crystalline object fashioned in the shape of a heart. Rex turned back and forth in his paws, and let out a bark of laughter. It was clearly fashioned in the shape of the old heraldry of the Crystal Empire, and while he was fully aware of the old legends, this clearly had to be a replication of the fabled totem that some child had placed in here before the palace had been renovated to fit the Order's needs. Placing the faux crystal heart back into its hold and the brick over it, he turned his head and noticed something very odd on the ground. It was a long piece of cloth, but the way it was lying on the ground bothered him. His eyes flicked to the standing horseshoe-shaped mirror, barely skipping over the small gems that decorated its rim. As he studied it, he realized what was wrong about this whole thing, beyond how the cloth must have fallen off of it in a windowless room. It wasn't crumpled up in front of the mirror, but it was as though someone had pushed it off to the side. Yes, that was it, although not quite right. The folds of the fabric were the wrong way for someone to have pushed it to the ground. Walking around it, with his back to the mirror, he saw that it was as if someone had come through the mirror and done the deed. How the deed was done was beyond him, as there was nothing behind the mirror that could act as a back door, and this was further proven when he tapped the back of the mirror and saw it was solid. How very peculiar, Rex said as he tapped his chin and looked at the mirror and wondered where this mirror came from, and tried to recall any legend that involved an odd-looking mirror. Part 3. Xvital. Xvital so regretted agreeing with Paige to look for her element this way. It was so boring. The mayor had her go through each box, forcing her to pry open the lid for each one, peering into it, and then sealing it back up without taking anything from the crates. "Come on, Paige," Xvital whined. "Can't I just take a little something?" "No," Paige replied. "Now come on, we're almost halfway done." "Gah, you're no fun," Xvital pouted as she took a drink from her canteen. "This place has so much stuff, and we could make so much money off of it." "Well, Xvital," Paige said as she ticked off a page and flipped to the next one, trotting to the next stack of crates. "We have gotten this far without needing to spend much of anything, and I don't see us winding up in a situation where we'll suddenly need a lot of cash." "Oh, come on, that's what poor people say," Xvital snorted, with Paige shooting a very librarian-ish look at her that made her wince. Sorry?" "Thank you," Paige chirped as she stood in front of a very large box. "Open this one, please. It should contain the armor of one... Quick thought. A pony who was tricked and turned into a wolf for a while until he figured out how to make the pony who did it change him back." "Oh, come on, that was just a ledge..." Xvital trailed off as she saw the armor of a pony, and with a quick poke, it had shifted into that of a wolf. "Well, I guess that legend is true." "And no, Xvital, you cannot take it and sell it to the highest bidder," Paige snarked at her, causing Xvital to flush and sputter. "I wouldn't do that, Paige Turner," Xvital pouted. "Mainly because you couldn't actually carry it out?" Paige asked, raising an eyebrow as she opened up a crate and studied the contents, then checked her list and covered her mouth. "Okay, no." "Why? What is it?" Xvital asked curiously. "An enchanted frying pan," Paige said disgustedly. "If the rightful owner hits some pony with it, it turns them into a giant poached egg. If any pony other than the rightful owner tries to use it, it turns them into a giant poached egg." "Yeah, definitely not," Xvital said, lifting the lid back onto the crate. "That's just freaky. And dangerous. Who in Equestria would create such a thing anyway?" "A very, very poor magician," Paige replied. "And it doesn't help that he missed his intended target. He tripped over something when he tried to cast the spell. Not only did it not give him the effect he wanted, he enchanted his wife's best frying pan instead of the Masumane sword he was aiming for." "He was trying to enchant a Masumane sword?" Xvital's eyes widened. "What kind of idiot messes with his swords? I thought he destroyed them all, and this joker wasted one with his botched spell? What kind of effect was he going for, anyway?" "No pony knows," Paige replied as she studied her list. "He never told any pony, except possibly his wife, and she never said anything. Because she became a giant poached egg, and that's how he found out about that part of the spell. You ponies and your magic can get pretty messed up," Xvital said, as they turned the corner to check out the boxes, when Night and Wind approached an armory full of when they spotted Night and Wind approaching an armory full of weapons. They were both clearly examining the items there instead of looking for her element, with Night holding a small dagger and Wind holding up a simple-looking bow. Then Night flashed a look at Wind, making sure the griffin saw what he was doing, and picked up a longer knife. Wind raised an eyebrow at this and picked up a slightly longer bow. Night responded by grabbing a gladius, while Wind found a longbow. Night then reached for an assegai, while Wind grabbed for a very large gastraphitis, and Night promptly found an even bigger sword. In response, Wind found a massive ironwood bow, only to see Nightblade now carrying a curved sword that was even longer than his body. The two stared at one another, perfectly still. "Ooh, what's that?" Vixley cooed, walking past them with a massive hammer with the head as big as she was in her hands. "You want me to take you with me? Oh, I don't know. You are a very pretty hammer, but I just don't know how Lady Kabonk and Signor Hardhead would feel about it. Oh, now don't be worried. I am sure everyone will like you just fine," Vixley continued to say as she walked out of view, stroking that insanely huge hammer she found. Turning her head back to Night and Wind, Vittel could see both of them were laughing their heads off, leaning on each other for support. "Oh my!" Windbreaker gasped. "Can you believe—" Gah! He broke off to laugh some more. I needed that." "I quite agree," Nightblade chortled as well, as making these high-pitched squeaks. "Really, how could one even use such a thing as this?" He lifted his last sword and shook his head. "Completely impractical, yet who in the world ever thought of making something so big was a good idea?" "I don't know," Windbreaker said as he studied his last weapon. "I think I heard a story about a guy with a bow this long and hard." "Oh, ha ha," he snarked when he saw Nightblade's expression. "But seriously, I think he was a minotaur or something, and held this contest to prove he was the strongest of them all, because none of the other minotaurs who tried could even bend it to string it, let alone fire the thing. Either that, or it was to prove his identity, because he was the only one who could ever string it and fire it." "Really?" Nightblade gave him an interested look. "Where did you hear about that?" "It was something about the longest journey, I think. It was back before I could fly, at any rate, so I don't really remember much else. Just that he had a lot of adventures at sea." "I'll have to see if I can find it myself someday, then," Nightblade told him. "If you do, be sure to let me know, so I can read it too," the Griffin replied, "because now I want to know if I'm remembering parts of it right." "I'll be sure to do that," Night said, as he started hanging weapons up and studying them, seeing if there were any that would actually suit him. As he looked over the swords again, Vittel turned her head to Paige and just smirked. "What an insane group we are, eh?" "I doubt there has ever been a group like ours, Vittel," Paige said as she stared at Night with a happy sigh. "Speaking of... Say, Paige, something I've been meaning to ask you. Are you feeding okay due to you and Night no longer being together?" Paige jerked at this, going back to her changeling self in surprise, before looking at her with a blush on her face. She fumbled for her words a little bit, before smiling. "I am doing quite fine. With the residual love that Night has, that Blender and you guys are feeding me just fine." "Blender?" Vittel blinked at the odd word. "Oh, well, that's what we call someone that can blend two emotions together," Paige said. "Neither emotion is greater than the other. They're a perfectly equal mix. It's incredibly rare, but Night is perfect at doing anger and love, and those two rarely mix well." "Really?" Vittel tilted her head at this, interested to know more. "Oh yes, love is just the sweetest, most fulfilling emotion you can ever taste, and anger is a fiery, spicy emotion that can easily leave a burnt taste in your mouth if you take too much in," Paige said, closing her eyes. "But Night is just able to hit that sweet spot and mixing those two emotions naturally when he duels, and then..." She let out a soft moan and began fanning herself. Vittel stared at her for a few seconds before she cracked a smile. "So I guess we now know why you like the spicy stuff, then, eh?" "Vittel!" Paige squeaked with embarrassment, looking to see if Night had heard them. "Let me guess. You were always thinking of yourself as a damsel in distress, with Night being your knight in shining armor to protect you, right? Vittel, Paige just glowered at her, her face heating up and telling Vittel she was right on the money. The Xvital started to laugh, but suddenly yelped as Paige gave her a telekinetic push, just enough to knock her off balance. Flailing her arms, she fell back onto one crate, feeling something sharp suddenly stabbing her in the side, letting out a screech. Yow! At the sudden cry of pain, Paige gasped, holding a hoof to her mouth before rushing over to her. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to push you that hard. As Night, Windbreaker, and Vix Lee hurried over as well, Vittel shook her head. It wasn't what you did. It was something I landed on. Shifting around, she managed to clamber back over the edge of the crate and dust herself off. I'm okay. If you're sure, Paige murmured. I'm sure. Checking herself one last time, Vittel reached into the crate. What is this thing anyway? She wondered aloud as she picked up the object that had poked her in the side. Studying it, she frowned as she saw the sharp edge that had done the poking. It looked something like a broken gem of some shape, attached to a warped, almost horseshoe-like piece of metal. The entire thing was bent and tarnished, and she curled up her lip in disgust for some reason. But at the same time, something within her yearned at her to put it on her head, that her entire life was leading up to this moment. Is that your element? Paige asked her. It looks wrong. Yeah, I think so, Vittel said as she turned it around in her hands, running her thumbs over the broken centerpiece with a low hiss. That felt incredibly wrong for some reason, but she could not place her finger on why. Well, I guess I should put it on and talk to the Magi of Stars? See what's going on? Vittel saw Paige, Wind, Night, and Vix Lee give her encouraging nods, and that was enough for her. Twisting the element around so that it would go on her head the right way, she began lowering it onto her head, when it was suddenly yanked out of her hands. She swore as a red and yellow-maned unicorn mare dashed past them. Hey, you! Night dove at the amber-coated mare, but she simply used her magic to push him to the side, jumping off Wind's face as the griffin tried to copy him. Paige let out a vicious-sounding hiss, spreading her wings out wide as she created a bubble around the mare. But whoever she was seemed unfazed and simply teleported out of it and continued in her mad dash. Oh, no you don't! Vix Lee shouted as she dropped the massive warhammer she found onto the ground, which caused everything to jump, and took a swing at her with her fake hammer on the mare. The thief simply used her opal-green magic to pull several crates down onto Vix Lee, causing the Minotaur to let out a stream of curses in her native language. Stop! Vittel called as she, Paige, Night, and Windbreaker chased after her. Vittel, what is going? Whoa! Rex let out a yelp as the mystery mare almost ran him over and nearly caused a nasty pile-up. Glancing back, the unicorn gave her a nasty smile before turning away and running towards an odd-looking mirror. As she reached it, instead of stopping, she ran through it, leaving only a ripple behind. Stopping just short of the mirror, Vittel gasped in astonishment as she and the rest of them suddenly stopped. Short in front of the mirror. Okay, what just happened? Gah! She shouted as she was suddenly shoved forwards by a furious Vix Lee and found herself suddenly flying into the mirror itself. There was a whirling motion, a flash of odd colors surrounding her, and then a ton of weight on her back with the groans of the rest of the crew. Where is that little skank that dropped that stuff on me? I'll smash her face! Vix Lee's shouting came to an abrupt end. Guys? Any tar else see this, or is it just me? Seeing what, Vix Lee? Oh my! Rex exclaimed. What in Equus is going on? Windbreaker said in awe, as Knight and Page let out gasps. Pushing herself upright to her knees, Vital rolled her eyes and asked, "What are you guys talking about?" She stopped as she saw her hand was no longer covered in fur, but was now light purple-blue skin. "Guys," Vixley said in a shaky voice, causing everyone to stare at her and recoil at how much she had suddenly changed. "I don't think we're in Equestria anymore." Alright, that's the end of this chapter. Clearly they just went through the mirror from Equestria Girls. I recognized the mirror when Rex first noted it was horseshoe-shaped. I didn't foresee them going through at that point, although, yeah, I didn't know if it would come up in this way. I wonder, it's interesting that Sunset's alive. That could mean a few things. Either there's some sort of temporal displacement, time takes place faster on the Equestria end. Or another answer is Sunset has some manner of keeping herself alive for a long time. You know, there's a few answers. I don't know. There's lots of ways that could happen, but there's definitely something going on, or she would be dead. And decomposed. Because it's been 1,000 years, and humans don't live 1,000 years, and I get the impression ponies don't live that long. 200 years was a really old man, and they didn't mention Sunset looking old, so she probably isn't super old at this point. Anyway, oh, there was something else. Oh, the heart! Heart. Rex found the crystal heart. I'm a little surprised he was so sure it was a fake. I wonder why he's so sure it's a fake. I don't remember. Did the crystal heart look chipped and battered after Sombra? Well, this is a different version. Sombra was in charge of the Crystal Empire a second time for a while. He moved it, among other things. I wonder what happened to it that made him so sure it was fake. Was he just expecting to get some sort of magic feel from it that he didn't get? It's dormant, Rex. It's hiding. It's not gonna seem super magical. Well, we are almost, like, let's see. We're on chapter 35, right? 35, yeah. There are only 48 chapters. We're getting close to the end. I didn't expect them to go through the mirror this late in the story. Then again, I do happen to know there's a sequel, so we'll see. Well, I feel like there was something else. Oh, yes, that's right. I was going to mention that it's interesting the Crystal Guards don't seem to necessarily like the Order. They're scared of the Order. They're probably more scared of the Order than the Equestrian Guard is, because they've been dealing with the Order more. They don't seem to be friendly. They seem to be terrified. And rightly so. Then again, if those are crystal ponies, and they're still suffering from that bit they had in canon, where they didn't want to think about anything, and they were just kind of depressed, then that could also be part of why they're generally afraid. Also specifically afraid of the Order, but just generally afraid. Of course, those could be not crystal ponies at all. People moved into the crystal... What was it they called it? Crystal Dominance. Anyway. Talked about the Order not being popular here. Talked about the heart. The mirror. As soon as Vital fell on something, I figured that was going to be the element. Oh, yes, the element. The element's all busted up. That was one of the things I was going to talk about. I wonder what caused that. I don't really have a good theory here. I mean, it wasn't that the previous element bearer was corrupted. Twilight was exploded. Dead. I don't get the impression she was post-unanimously corrupted, so something happened to the element itself, perhaps. It lasted thousands of years in dormancy around the, Castle of the Two Sisters without being corrupted, so it's not just that it was left alone too long, I don't think. But maybe Sunset has been trying something with this, and it's been giving her trouble. Like, it wouldn't let her take it, but her attempts to do so damaged it in some way. That could be it. That's an interesting idea. Alright, that's my current leading theory until something happens to demonstrate why that's incorrect. Or maybe it'll be what happened, you know. I could be right. It happens occasionally, like with Paige being a changeling. I had about this much evidence for it when I first thought that too. And sometimes I'm wrong. I may always remember Gladstone being a changeling. Just that. I was so confident. I'm not going to be that confident with anything where this story is going after this, because that just shattered my confidence in my ability to predict. I'm still going to make predictions. I still think I'm pretty good at it. But, whoo, boy, that one, yeah, yeah, that, I'm going to remember that. Like Sherlock. Does anyone here know the story about when Sherlock and the yellow-faced monkey, or whatever it was called? Okay, I'm gonna look it up now. I'm pausing this. Ooh, interesting! This here says that it's one of the more frequently overlooked ones. I have only seen it one time, and not in a particularly popular version of Sherlock Holmes. So yeah. The Adventure of the Yellow Face. Feel free to look into it. I am not gonna say what happens because it's a spoiler. But I will say Sherlock is wrong. Dead wrong. I'm not going to say what does happen, but I mean, it's one of the few times, not the only time, but one of the few times that Sherlock pulls one of his amazing deductions and goes to reveal it, and he's wrong. Some of the last words in the book are Sherlock turns to Watson and says, "If I ever seem like I'm getting too confident in myself, remind me of this, and I will be in your favor, or in your debt." This is an excellent example of what happens when I get too cocky about my abilities to deduct. What The Adventure of the Yellow Face is to Sherlock Holmes, Gladstone's revelation of being a changeling is to me. I don't know if I told you this, guys, but there were people in the comments section of the story on Friendship is Magic Fiction, where I read this, who were saying that Gladstone was clearly a changeling. And I responded to one of them informing them that I didn't think he was, and gave them an example of what he was. They were right. The obvious answer was the correct answer. I'm confident the author was borrowing from Sunnytown. But they were not borrowing as much as I thought they were borrowing. He was still a changeling. Ooh, wow, yeah. It's a good memory. Not a proud one, but, you know, it's a good learning experience. I have no problem with the author for tricking me that effectively. It was a masterful turn. They weren't obligated to hold to that. It's not canon. So they can include or not include any pieces of it they like. It was an excellent way of throwing a curveball that had plenty of foreshadowing. It wasn't out of nowhere. We saw evidence these guys were changelings. Bravo, evil humor. Bravo. Whew. That alone will leave me remembering this story forever. I might have anyway. This is a fine story. I like it. But that scene, that story, that Gladstone fellow, I will always remember it. Or at the very least for a long time. I mean, my memory is really bad, but I might always remember it. There are some things I still remember. We'll see. but I'll probably remember it for a decade, so that's not a short time. Anyway, I've talked for longer than normal. I wish you all a pleasant time. Thank you for listening. Goodbye, everybody.